Hi.
Hello.
Hey, Glenn.
Are we alone or what?
We're never
Hang on
alone.
a second. I got to switch phones here. Okay.
Never alone, Glenn. Someone's always watching.
Hey?
Someone's always watching. Every step we take, every breath we take.
Yeah.
We watch.
There's about 2,000 of them.
Yeah.
Who's on the line now?
Dana and Jared.
The regulars.
And me.
Yeah.
2,000 others. Left unknown, unspoken of.
There might be others that come on. There might be. I can't tell. Dana might be able to.
Yeah, I'll let you know if anyone else comes on.
Any news of the week?
Well, I wanted to ask you a question about the flag that you have up.
Canadian flag with the right colors.
Yeah, what do those colors represent?
The Canadian flag is red and white.
Yeah, but yours is like green and blue or something?
Mine has blue stripes, green maple leaf. The blue stripes represent from sea to shining sea.
Between two seas.
I looked, don't live in Israel or Egypt. He wasn't red. It was blue. So I have made sure that my stripes are blue. Since we have the Atlantic Ocean on one side and Pacific Ocean on the other side. Now, when I looked at a maple tree, there's one thing I realized immediately. Yes, the leaf can be red, but when it's red, it's dead. That during the summer, the leaf is green. And therefore, if we want to be alive,
you get the green.
Not dead, it makes sense to me that the leaf should be green.
Yeah.
And the last part of it is underneath the green maple leaf, red on the Canadian flag, is an area of white, which to me stands for the Pentecost, which they call wit instead of white, and it deals with an entire week following the Pentecost, which is 49 days after Easter, and has 9 days with special ceremonies or whatever that follow the Pentecost that honor something or other. And I decided that if we were to have water on either side and leaves growing in the middle, the color underneath the leaf should be at least closer to earth color. So I chose an off-white, sandy type color for the middle part. Mm-hmm. In other words, just to make it less symbolic of Masonic ecclesiastic Freemasonry, and more in line with what creation had in mind.
Yep.
And finally, I fly the flag at half-mast and upside down.
Yeah, I've heard about the upside down thing. They do that over here.
Upside down is basically a sign in maritime world that there is a problem.
Yeah.
And somebody should come to the rescue.
I've heard they've done that with the American flag, and they say that the real colors of the American flag is, I think, black and white or something like that.
Well, the stripes went horizontal instead of vertical, or vertical instead of horizontal.
Well,
the civil flag.
The name America comes from the word Tamerlane. So if you write Tamerlane, piece of paper, and you would read from the second line in, Amer, there is no L,
Yeah.
A can be an I, C can be an N on its side, E can be an A. America. So that excludes the first letter, removes the L, and changes into code the A-N-E at the end into I-C-A.
Oh, yeah. I remember years back, you did that Desert Owl interview. You said it was at a time like right now, and you said that Easter, it signified the end of a new beginning or something like that?
Easter is basically a play on the name of a woman called Esther. Esther was a spy who was put into the harem of the Persian ruler of the time. And she was put there by the Jewish community. In those days known as Hebrews. And in her visits to the king of the day, she endeared herself to him to the point where he agreed to fulfill her wishes. In other words, she gave him oral sex, which he had never had before from any of the people in the harem. They were just there to make babies, and earned the right to hang around longer than most. So she became the queen of Persia, while the Persians were enemies of the Hebrews, and Hebrews were enemies of the Persians at the time. She became queen, and from the bedroom ended up telling the king what he should do.
Yeah.
And the first thing she told the king to do was to fire his prime minister, if you will, because he was not working on the king's behalf, she said, and put in her uncle instead. And the king agreed, put in the uncle, and from that point on is basically the concept of destroying an empire from within. It's done at two levels, one by the agents on the outside,
giving instructions to
the military and to the civil service, and secondly, from the bedroom, coming through the back door and providing services to the king, which in a bureaucracy relates to executive assistants, clerks, receptionists, all of the people who are involved with day-to-day activity, being in fact spies against the person they claim to represent. And I can vouch that that is what is going on in the current Canadian government. When you make a call to a government department, you are asked a number of questions by an automated system which defines whether or not you should deal with the bureaucracy or with an executive assistant working with the minister or the political side. And once that determination is made, you have no knowledge of who you're dealing with. You think you're dealing with a person in the office who's going to do what it says in the manual, what they're supposed to do. But in fact, if they have a quote-unquote political reason, which extends, by the way, beyond politics to the needs of the actual controllers of each country, ecclesiastic Freemasonry or the Valkyries, then you are serviced in the way they choose rather than in the way you think they should be doing it. The only way to break the cycle is to pay thousands of dollars to a lawyer who is familiar with the rules and can, in fact, force activity that is not moving fast enough into a courtroom and have your case heard before a judge, probably who is in on a system as opposed to another system. For example, the Valkyries have their own system, and the military has their own system, and business has their own system, and the politician has their own system, and the priests have their own system. So depending on which one you end up with, they will determine to go the way your lawyer wants it or not. But it has nothing to do with you getting a fair deal. It only deals with them getting what they want. That's what creation basically is analyzing when it's saying, is there any redeeming social value to what's there, or should it all be destroyed? And from looking at it superficially, one would have to agree that there's nothing left in the system worth saving, and therefore, hey, expect the worst. But creation basically is saying, yeah, but if there are a few people worthy of being saved, and by that it doesn't mean children or people who don't know, because whether you know it or not, these children may all have dormant capabilities that have been placed there by the system to be reactivated at a later date. What creation is looking for is those people with a functioning brain that's defined as not being self-serving at the expense of causing pain elsewhere.
I heard you mention too, Glenn, the other day. You said something about in a day where like harassment was a big thing, sexual harassment.
I'm not hearing. I said the other day something about, and then harassment, and I didn't hear anything in between.
Yeah, you said that I think you said something along the lines of like harassment was really big, but it wasn't. It was women harassing other women.
Sexual harassment.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I told you the other day was that when I was in British Columbia, working on the defense of one of the native chiefs there, a guy by the name of Wolverine. His name is, in English, is Ignace. Ignace. Second name, family name. I happened to be provided with a space to park my camper on a native camping ground, right at the U.S. border between British Columbia and Washington State. There's a place called the Peace Arch, and there's native group there that have a campground, probably for smuggling purposes. And while I was on the campground, I noticed a Caucasian man in his late 50s, early 60s. I was young then. I was only, 10 years, 12 years ago or so. He was spending time in his camper and puttering around, and I went by and said hi and found out that he was a former member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and had retired, is what he said. And I said, "You look a little too young to retire." He said, "I just couldn't take it anymore." I said, "Well, what's the problem? We know that a lot of politics goes on." He said, "No," he says, "it's the recent evolution of a problem that didn't exist in the past, but since the RCMP has changed the rules that make it possible for women to serve as policemen, there's been a problem in the RCMP involving sexual harassment. I took the normal approach and said, "You mean to say the officers, the male officers, are harassing the women?" And he said, "No. Female officers are harassing the junior female officers. I can't get anything done because there's too much of this stuff going on, and you don't know why you're not getting things and that kind of stuff." He said, "I just threw up my hands and said I've had enough." So what appears to be going on is the same thing as appears to be going on in the port of entry gang at the border, and that's that there is a process by which people are being hired into the police force and the port authority guards and probably the prisons and maybe CSIS as well, and that's under the designation of public safety. The minister being Vic Tays. There is a requirement for advancement that sends those that are qualified to a place called Rigaud, Vaudreuil de Rigaud. Rigaud is a place near Montreal that when I was a child I was taken to, and it was linked to the priesthood, nuns and priests and whatever. And in looking back on it, I can basically say that it was involved with the abuse of children and the programming of children. But apparently they've taken a back seat, at least that's the public discussion, and turned that center into a training center for people hired in government departments. I don't know if they're limited to that public safety area, but they certainly include the public safety area. And from the investigations that we have done and research that has been done into that area because of what they did to me, it basically was discovered that there are three levels through which you progress when you're in one of these public safety jobs. And the third level appears to be one designed either to select from the candidates or modify the candidates into what we would call sociopaths. And those people are given a place at Rigaud. They call it taking a seat at Rigaud. When a seat becomes available, and all of that is linked to the story of St. Francis Assisi, which basically, assis in French means seated. The Pope has a meeting planned for Assisi in October for all the leaders of the religious world. But I think the one thing these people have in common is that they are sociopaths. They basically don't care what happens to people, to human beings. Psychopaths, sociopaths.
Yeah, they don't have the sense of community.
No. And that's what they've been hiring from the people who come and have the physical qualifications and then have the aptitudes to do the job as a second level, but the third level to be guaranteed employment seems to be that you have to be a sociopath, and either you come with the qualities necessary, especially if you're a woman, and or they add it to you through recessive gene manipulation. And all of this is linked to the Montreal Neurological Institute, the work of Wilder Penfield. Links are to Tucson, Arizona, and the links to the community there where the congresswoman was shot recently by another member of the congregation who is a sociopath. But we've had all kinds of cases recently where members of the RCMP, prison guards, or public safety people at the border have been videotaped physically or sexually abusing the people that they came in contact with. I think there are 3 or 4 cases going on in the Ottawa police station right now about the treatment of prisoners. One black woman who was charged with assaulting a police officer was discovered with the videotapes that in fact it was the reverse, that she was dragged into a prison cell, she was beaten, her clothes was removed forcibly. One of the officers went and got scissors, cut her bra off, and this kind of stuff is being repeated all over the country. So it appears as if the concentration has been on bringing women as opposed to women into Canada if they're immigrants, and if they're from here, making sure that the sociopaths among them all end up on the front line and are abusive to the people they're supposed to be serving, and that the original people in charge of prisons, of police stations, of RCMP, border guards, all of the good people are leaving, making room for promotions more and more to these people. And the interesting thing is they seem to differentiate themselves from government by being called agencies. And an agent is someone who works for somebody else, who represents somebody else. Mm-hmm. And since they're not representing the people, they can't be called government, so they're calling them agencies. And then in government itself, similar activities is going on, but they call themselves executive assistants or secretaries or receptionists, and they're not the violent ones, but they're the ones who'll rifle through the files and redirect things so that the people in charge have no sense of what's really going on, even though they take the blame as politicians. They haven't got a clue what's going on in the background. So these two groups, one in agencies, and of course the IRS in Canada is called Canada Revenue Agency, which basically means that the tax collector in Canada doesn't respond to anything the government has to say. You write them a letter, they don't respond. They do what they want. They act just like the mafia acts. They sent me a notice at one time about 10 years ago that I owed them $5,000. And I asked them why. They didn't respond. I wrote to them at least half a dozen times. They didn't respond. Then I started writing it on my income tax return. I want a trial. I don't care whether it's your judge, your lawyers, your prosecutors, your courtrooms, and that you have all the right to do whatever you want. All I want from you guys is disclosure. All I want to do is find out who you've given access to on my file. Never get a response. And finally, last year or the year before, they just basically refused to admit that I had filed my income tax. If you call there, the first thing they'll say is, we don't have any knowledge that you filed your income tax. Well, my income tax was signed by me. All the appropriate documents were included, and I said, you go ahead and you fill out the squares. All the money I get comes from the government. Here are your papers. This is your document. You fill it out. You don't need me to do that. And they sent it back to me. And this is totally different from how they deal with other taxpayers. Tom here, he gets a phone call, and they just ask him a few questions on the telephone, then they send him a check. So, me, it doesn't matter what I do. I want a trial. And for 10 years now, I've been asking on my income tax report a trial. So by saying that I didn't file, they get to steal any of the rebates that I normally would get as a senior citizen. Tax, sales tax rebate, that kind of stuff, for the elderly and for the poor. So that's the situation we're dealing with. And I know it's happening here in Canada, but I suspect that every country in the world is called a country for the same reasons, is that you get screwed. That the tax collector doesn't work for your government, and your border authority doesn't work for the government, your prison authority doesn't work for the government, your courts don't work for the government. So whatever it was that we were told to expect in a democracy doesn't happen anymore, if it ever did. Doesn't happen. We live basically in a world of slavery.
Yep.
And they don't have to deal with us as they would with citizens. They simply deal with us as slaves, and that means they don't have to explain anything. They can do what they want because we're so dumbed down as a population that nobody basically knows enough to make
they don't know the rules. They don't know
decision at election time, and it doesn't matter who you vote for; they're all the same.
Yeah, I think it's people. They don't know the rules, and
doesn't matter what the rules are; they don't abide by any rules.
And whoever, and if you do know, it's too small of a number to be. So it's like easy for them to ignore you. If it was large numbers of people asking the same questions, I think it would be more of a problem.
When I went to protest on Parliament Hill, they told me I had no right to be there. I got arrested 10 times in 3 years. Each time they were told by the court, the politicians have the right to make rules about what happens inside the building. Outside the building is the people's place. And you can't make rules for people outside. You can make rules when it comes to a demonstration. A demonstration basically signifies a large group of people. How large you can define anything from 2 people onward. And you can make rules for public safety that determine where they can have their demonstration. But the police were always told by the courts, Mr. Kealey is not a demonstration. Mr. Kealey is a lone demonstrator. As such, you have no authority over where he stands or what he says. It's his place outside. As a citizen of Canada, it's his property, not yours. So what they would do is release me. I would go back to Parliament Hill, continue what I was doing, and then they wrote a law which said no lone protester can protest within 75 meters of any doorway.
So anything over one person is a demonstration. This is a large.
By writing the law, they arrested me again. Again, it was thrown out, not just by the courts, but by the courts of appeal, who said you don't have the right to do this. This law is not in effect. It is not legal to write a law limiting the rights of an individual. But they didn't care, see. And as soon as I left Parliament Hill after 1,000 days, having made my point, they disregarded everything that had been said to me, and any new person that arrives there, they tell them it's illegal for them to do what I was doing and was proven to be legal. So these new people don't know. and they take it for granted, and they leave. So that, the question remains, is there any reason why creation would continue this experiment, this process of evolution in these kind of conditions, way off track from what creation had intended? My view is the same as was expressed in the allegories of the Bible that said, where Lot, in discussion with the angels about the destruction of the planet, was, how many people prove there is a reason not to destroy?
Yeah.
What if 50 people were good? And the Bible's allegory goes on to say, well, show me the 50. Well, what if it was only 30? Well, show me the 30. And in the end, the world of that time is destroyed by a flood, but the individuals who showed that they had reason not to be destroyed, Lot, his 2 daughters, and wife, were saved. His wife was turned into a pillar of basalt in the allegory when she didn't live by the original contract, leaving only the 2 daughters who, in order to jumpstart the world, it says, got their father drunk, slept with him, and that way had children. Well, creation is basically at that point now where, hey, do we let a pseudo-hermaphrodite that contains within it male, female, and 10 elements of biochemistry that is in fact linked to technology of spying built into it? Is that what was intended, and is that what we need? And if you had to make a decision today and look around, you would say there is a scientist called Stephen Hawking. He has shown interest in the work of the University of Waterloo. The University of Waterloo is in southwestern Ontario on the Bruce Peninsula. He has suggested he would like to work there. Their claim to fame in the world of business is RIM, Research in Motion. What does that mean to you? Well, to me, what it means is making a great spy out of the technology that was either mechanical or chip technology, converting that to biotechnology according to the rules set down by Wilder Penfield. And by merging that technology into a human body, you have a spy in motion. And their initials being RIM,
Roll up the rim to win.
Yeah, roll out the rim and win. And the Tim Horton, which is the coffee distributors in Canada, they use roll out the rim to win.
BlackBerry uses, they're called rim devices. Research in Motion.
Number 2 guy at Research in Motion, well, first of all, the number 1 guy is Turkish descent. Number 2 guy, his name is Vasily. Silly Ba. Silly balls are the structure, the philosopher's stones put in a structure to build words upon. Silly balls. He's Vasily. And their link is to churches known as basilicas. And they were established by the Basilian priests. Bas, sab, backwards, skull and bones. Bas. And since a B is the penultimate of C, you can also say sack, which is a bag or a hadron, and therefore take out the contents of the hadron, change the quarks located in a particular bag and put in different stuff. You can make up new cells for human beings that provide control from the outside by remote control. And therefore the reason why Masonic priests sign off their letters, so mote it be, so remote it be. That's the goal they have. They're working on it. All the technology has now been proved to function, and that means the next step is to integrate that into a single person. So a rim means the outer edge, the veneer is female. The inside infrastructure is male, and then that biotechnology that goes by the name Ike, which basically is linked to nickel as opposed to copper for male, and silver for female. Nickel becomes the controlling entity, or Ike, bike, dike, like, pike. It's a combo unit made up of 10 parts, 10 elements. I suggest that that's been in the works since the Ice Age. We have now arrived at the time when it's got to be put in place, and everybody who's not there can be deleted from the planet, therefore the mass extermination of the northern hemisphere.
Yeah, you mentioned something too the other day. You said 57 days.
57 days seems to be a code which they use and have been using, and it's basically saying that the time of the original is finished, and it's time to kind of grind it down, and the way they use it is by putting it on a bottle of ketchup. Now, the actual way they used to write ketchup was C-A-T-S-U-P.
Catsup.
Catsup. Like we
soup.
began as eels in water. We grew legs and came out of the water. We evolved into the first real mammal with a spine, vertebrae, through a small cat-type figure. Some branches went off to be monkeys. Some branches remained cats. Some branches became human. And some branches started to fly. Over time, we have all of the vertebrae we have today, and all based upon the original, which was a small cat. And catsup is basically a stew made up of the contents that are all mixed together. And the same thing would be if you described what you had after a nova. In the Bible, they call it a mess of potage, which basically means fish stew. So if you mix all the land with all of the water and turn it all into quicksand, you have fish stew.
You think they also, the word ketchup, you think they're also saying, catch up?
Catch up
yeah,
to what the system wants is a phonetic version as well. There is nothing in languaging that limits it to one particular definition. It is imperative for the system to have more than one definition, because if you come up with one, they can tell you another and use that as deniability.
Yeah.
So, Glenn, what do you think? Do you think something next month be a possibility?
Well, if you look at those 57 days, and you start with coming in on an ass, everything starts with coming in on an ass, and that's Palm Sunday. So beginning at Palm Sunday and coming in on an ass to Easter, you have a week. And then in order to get to Pentecost, you have 7 more weeks, 49. And then you have a few days, with Monday, with Tuesday, with Wednesday, each one having a special designation as to who it serves. But your 57 days basically are included in taking the time from Palm Sunday to Pentecost. So this is the most important time of their year, starting last Sunday and going 50 days from tomorrow, with a add-on at the end if one cares to be really specific. They have 9 specific days, starting with Monday, with Tuesday, with Wednesday, with Thursday, so 9, each one designated something different. But the important period is that 50 days. And that basically is suggesting that if you're going to do something, it should happen at that time. And that means getting wisdom. That's what the Pentecost is getting wisdom. And wisdom basically means their 10-element strategy for the Ike or Dike or Nike or whatever you want to call it, nickel. And I would suggest that if they're going to do something this spring, it would normally happen in this time. And since they start with something minor and go to something major, one can expect that you would have something happen between now and the Pentecost dealing with a flood, important in its own right, but not the worst. And then get the big bang at the end of the year in November. So every day I look out the window when I wake up to see whether or not it's about to happen. And on Monday, Thursday, which is the day before Good Friday, a fox entered the property here. Fox carries the letters ox. Ox lead you to your death if you take it in the terms of bullfighting.
Yeah.
Oxes are put in with the bulls because they know the routine. So we had a fox came in, destroyed, and ran off with, and I don't know how many foxes there were, but there was one I saw right outside my window, 6 white chickens.
Wow.
Why did they choose the white chickens that lay eggs over white chickens that are meat birds, over brown chickens that lay eggs? I don't know. But I have a sense that maybe creation has something to do with a hint. But it could also be that the system brought the fox. Similar event had occurred a couple of years ago where we lost all of our birds, and I was told that there was a van parked across the street from which exited the fox. From the Department of Natural Resources. You know, if you have a predator on your farm and you call your government department, they gladly send you people over to capture it and take it to your neighbor. And then when he calls, they go gladly pick it up from him and bring it back to you. Because each time they basically are serving their own purposes. And I was told by a trapper that I hired when I first moved in here that he had worked for the Department of Natural Resources, and he had seen the documentation that said that this is the kind of activity they should do. And when I asked him what the purpose was, he says, in service, the government is in service to box stores. And people who want to run farms that are self-sufficient are a danger, real and present danger to box stores. And therefore, you must assist the box store by claiming that nature has been changed by farming or lumbering and whatever, and animals have been displaced, so they have to be brought back in. And out in the western part of the U.S., they brought in some wolves from Canada to repopulate the area, and now there's so many wolves there that they're taken off the endangered species list. Well, if you put in foxes or raccoons or skunks in quantity in any area that you call, quote unquote, a farm, you cannot have free range. You end up with factory farming because everything is being kept indoors. So that's basically the bigger picture as far as I can see from here. We are slaves. We cannot be self-sufficient. Our government doesn't know what's going on. Their clerks are not on side. The border guards and the police and the prison guards are being tested for being sociopaths. And those people, instead of being rejected, are being hired and positioned to control the slaves. You tell me whether or not creation has common sense in suggesting that maybe the time has come for a cleansing. And since it doesn't have to do it because the idiots in charge are going to do it themselves, creation's only role is to stop it from happening, to delay it from happening by doing nothing, or just to let it happen. Right now, I would suggest that everything is leaning towards let it be. Let it be. Let the idiots use the rope, hang themselves.
So my problem is like, because the situation I'm in is like, I don't want to make the wrong move or something, or not move quick enough. Like, so I don't know when exactly, it's gonna happen. Because remember last November, we were thinking, or I think November or October, I'm not sure. Something was gonna happen.
Hold that thought. I gotta go. I'll be back in a second.
Oh, okay. Yo, Dana.
Yeah.
So you think with that timing, I guess, like, 'cause you never know, like, when exactly, like. When it's gonna happen exactly. So it's always in the air, you know.
Yeah, I know. He said he looks out the window every morning to see if it's happening. And I'm like, so do I.
Man, I look out. I look at nighttime, man. I'm like,
Yeah. 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 There's always the possibility, so.
I'm back.
Yeah. So I was saying.
Weatherman is going to be right after all. It was supposed to be 18 degrees centigrade today. It always was 8 and raining and cold this morning, and now it's 15. So all of a sudden the sun's out. Maybe it's because we're telling the truth. We're being rewarded.
Yeah. So I was saying, Glenn. Like I don't know, like when exactly, because it's always in the air. Like it could happen now. It could happen. It could happen at this time. So I don't know, like when exactly to up and go.
Exodus.
The whole idea, Gerd, is either you believe what you're seeing happen around you and you take the necessary steps as soon as you can. You know that there's a window. It opened in 2008. If you believe that, you also believe that the window closes in 2058 with 4 years grace, 2062 apparently on the return of Halley's Comet, and that there are going to be events, at least 3 separate events that take place in that time. So it's not a matter of when's the best time. Best time was in 2008.
Yeah.
Every morning is the next time.
Yeah.
So, but if you can't do things, you can't do it, period. I mean, that's as simple as it is. You're not supposed to be doing things you physically cannot do. Every day you're supposed to look at where you are, what your resources are, what your capabilities are, make a list of what needs to be done, do number 1, forget the rest, and get number 1 done. If getting out of the potential way of destruction is your number 1, you move. If it's not, you don't.
That's my number 1, but options eliminated. I have to deal with.
You can only live with what you have. You know? Creation knows the difference. Creation knows those people who have functioning brains and would do things if they had the resources to do them. And I've put the basic thesis out that no one should be deprived of the opportunity of responding by resources that are missing. And therefore, if creation plans destruction, creation should also plan resources be made available to those people it knows are, in fact, operating on functioning brains.
Yeah.
I'm waiting. And it appears that it functioned in Jenny's case, although not in the way that I expected. She was, in fact, allowed to earn an income for a number of years leading up to her visit here, and then made the decision to move here permanently and was allowed to make it to the border. Not what we had in mind, but better than being stuck at doing work that is not going to solve the problem, even though with a good income in Southern California. So being at the border here, 30-some kilometers away from me, I look at as the maple leaf on our flag has a stem, and that stem is the St. Lawrence Seaway. And on one side there is a point of the leaf, and on the other side there is a point of the leaf. To me, Jenny is that point, and I'm on the other side. And we're waiting for the 9 other points of the maple leaf to arrive. But people cannot be blamed if they don't have the resources. So, you know, I'm open to the concept that should an offer be completed that will transfer what I am told, $3 million for the book rights, for example, to the story we're talking about, of taking that $3 million and providing $100,000 to people I believe have the potential for being the 13th. And with $100,000 have no excuse. Doesn't mean they'll do it. Just means I think they'll do the right thing. If they do, they can take it from there and make their own pledge to creation. If they choose to do something else, that's their business. So, should that come about, and there has been talk of that for a number of years now, that's what I would do. Should I win the lottery and they provide me with the funds, I'd do the same thing. Should Ma Bell reimburse me for the project they stole from me in 1987 with the help of the Prime Minister's office, and reimburse me the $21 million plus interest they stole from me at the time, I would do the same thing. But if creation chooses, as it did with Jenny, to provide the funds by some other means for them to get involved at the level at which creation determines is needed at this point, and I suggest there has to be a reason why she had to go to Ogdensburg and fall into a community that is different. One can make the argument that it is an ecclesiastic community, that the name suggests that it is mobile because it has the word berg in it. So it's in motion. And the front part suggests that it's God's house. Ogdens, a den is the home of cave dwellers, and Og is just God with the letters scrambled. So Ogdensburg is linked to in motion. Does it mean it's in motion because Canadian shield is rising, and they're at the tip, and therefore they are in motion that way? Or is it in motion because they're involved with Dr. Wilder Penfield's plan and the people in Arizona at Tucson's plan to create a better slave, and that research in motion, the company is working at putting the pieces together like syllables fit in a word? Bacilli suggests as much. Who's going to be third? Who's going to be fourth? Who's going to be fifth? And so on. All depends upon what they believe and then what resources are provided to make it happen. In my particular case, I chose that the resources did not have to be financial, that the resources that I had was an appropriately programmed brain. One programmed by creation and manipulated by creator gave me a view of the world that I could use in staying alive, and I took the risk that the resources I needed were not financial, just opportunities.
Yeah.
That was when I went to Parliament Hill and asked the politicians to stop stealing, which landed me in jail because that was obviously evidence to the system that I was nuts. That's like asking a butcher not to cut meat or a baker not to bake bread.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the, you know, I guess the resources for me, like I have to, you know, for like financial and stuff, like I don't have resources like most people, but it's a little bit, so maybe that's all I need, you know.
That's a decision everyone has to make on their own.
Yeah.
It's part of the process. Creation knows. Creation will not be disappointed in those that don't actually have the resources they need to do the job. Would be disappointed, I imagine, on those that, like me, it figured had been given the resources to get out there and the training to get out there, to risk without worry or depression at the thought of seeing everything being exactly the opposite to what I had been taught it was. Hypocrisy rules the world.
Hippo, CIRS.
Hypothalamus.
The hippo.
So,
Yeah.
that's my word of the day. Unless there's a question that needs answered, I got animals that need feeding.
I don't write any questions down usually, Glenn, so it's always off the top of my. And if I do have a question, I gotta start writing them down because sometimes
You got anything, Danny?
Um, I recently found, as of last night, this up in the Adirondacks. There's about a mile stretch by there's a place called Rice Lake, Madawaska Pond, Quebec Pond. There's about a mile stretch of just checkerboard on the map, like on it looks like it's made with like trees and it's on the Google Earth map here.
Yeah, upstate. It's like all checkerboards, like the like I'm not sure like how far, like what town was it upstate? What?
It's.
I think it was
I'm
like
not sure that
it was like Potsdam or something like that, or Penn or something.
It's kind of close to Potsdam. It's off of, I guess it's at Route 30.
It's a region they call the Finger Lakes, I think. Eh?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little, kind of close to that.
Yeah, honeymoon area for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's right. It's in the Adirondack State Park. So there's just like a mile stretch. I measured it, about a mile of just actual checkerboard. You could see it from the sky. So I mean, I don't know if that's some type of, it can be seen from above. Is basically what I'm getting at. So if you're flying over, you might be able to see this thing. But I've been searching the net trying to find people mentioning it, but there's nothing. I haven't been able to find anything yet. So I don't, reminds me of the to the west in California there's the owl, right? And then to the east here there's the checkerboard. So
well, it's in the area where they have a lot of meetings of the people who are involved in this. Come out of Montreal, come out of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's like a halfway point for them, like.
Yeah. And they use excuses for going there, like honeymoons and stuff like that, but it really has a dual purpose. Just like Disneyland,
Right.
Walter Lantz and Walt Disney both use Walter, and if you look at the code, it can be converted to Wilder with no problem at all. They're in the business of animation.
Yeah. Reanimation.
Engineering is reanimation.
Yeah, it looks like it's about 40 or 60 miles away from the Canadian border.
Yeah.
Kind of below Messina, Potsdam over there to the northwest of it, or the west of it. So.
No doubt Potsdam has tight links to Germany, and the area around it is Amish country, who basically come from, the Quaker type background.
Mm-hmm.
And Amish are walking through, doing shopping in Ogdensburg, buying dry goods, dried up stuff like macaroni, Kraft dinner, by quantities that seem abnormal for people who are not even supposed to be involved in the system. They seem to be. And they have the word ami in there, as does Islam. Friends relates to ami.
Nothing.
Friend in French, rien in the middle relates to none. None relates to nuns in a convent. And the UN. So there's a lot of links based upon the word ami AMI.
Yeah, I found a link. There's a guy. I think his last or his first name, I'm not sure, was me. He's the one that wrote the national anthem in America.
Hmm. And of course, an M is just two N's, so the same thing applies with an E.
Yeah. I remember the whole. There was a big thing. It was in the '90s with Joey Buttafuoco and Amy Fisher, or Amy.
Yeah.
Amy Fisher. And I heard the guy who wrote the song for Amazing G-Race.
Yeah.
He worked, from what I was told, he was like a captain of a ship, and he would, I forgot what reason for, but he would just fling people off the ship, killing a lot of people.
Yeah.
Supposedly, he had some epiphany with God or whatever, and he wrote that song or something.
Judge and jury, a captain of a ship.
Yep. From the bridge, the medulla.
Yeah. And of course, on land here, they call this a township.
Yeah.
When you apply to become a citizen, you have to go to citizenship. So therefore, these people are telling you up front that they are not under the control of what you think of the state government, the provincial government. They are masters of their own ship.
Yep, exactly.
And that means they can steal, they can kill, all with the guarantee that they're being protected.
Yeah, that's I remember when I went on a cruise years ago. People weren't allowed to gamble or anything. As soon as they sailed off the land, they were allowed to gamble, sell cigarettes.
Yeah.
Because it was like they made their own rules on the sea.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
All right.
Gotta go.
Okay. Bye.
All right.
And bye for now.
Bye.
All right, bye.